Jeremy Vaeni. That's me, back with you for the third and final installment of our Leaving Neverland dissection in such a way that I don't think anyone else is doing, which is why I'm doing it this way, because, as I said in the first video, there is plenty of great information out there. And you've already heard that take. We already know why Wade and Jimmy might be speaking untruths. And I know some people just want me to keep it simple and just say they're lying and not give other options as to how they could be speaking untruths, but I think it's important not to ascribe certain motive, clear motive to people when there are other options, and it's also important to see how our minds work, how it is possible to make something up and believe it, essentially, through either a mental breakdown, through hypnosis, through creative visualization, all sorts of methods. It's just important to keep these things in mind. But let's wipe all that away and deal with the big super duper issue that applies to us all through all of this, which gets to the thing that I said in the first video, was that HBO is on the hunt for emotive documentaries. And when I said it at the time, I was thinking of a quote. I was actually misquoting in my head HBO. It was actually Q Media, K-E-W, who are the distributors of Leaving Neverland, who had acquired the film. And in the article I was reading, they were spouting the noise of how great it is to have acquired, emotive documentaries. This is what they do, and then they distribute them. So the reason I didn't apologize for that in the second video, for getting that wrong in my head and correcting it, is because it's not only is it a distinction without a difference, in then looking that up, I found another article which throws everything. It just I got to question where we are as a society at this point. So HBO is not only directly guilty of searching for emotive whatever, but of changing the playing field in documentaries so that people start producing them this way. And why? Because, yes, they are big sellers, but they're big sellers because this is where we are now in society. And so, of course, I knew that the media loves to play on emotion and forego facts where it can, and this is we see this playing out in the news in America, right? So we all know that, like, the news, the mainstream news, has always been kind of crappy, and then Fox News came along and made an art out of it. They just basically said, we're propaganda for the right wing, and that is what we are, and we're going to call ourselves news for as long as we can get away with it. But that was always an issue of the news. And now what I'm seeing is that, no, this is actually also an issue of documentaries. And let me read part of an article here. This is an article from May 7th, 2015, from a website called fastcompany.com. And the title is Inside HBO's Quest for Emotional Truth. The author is KC, the letters KC. I don't even know how to pronounce this. Ifeanyi. Ifeanyi? I'm sorry, I'm butchering the name, but that is the name of the author. And so this article is talking about Brett Morgan, who is the director of the Kurt Cobain documentary, Kurt Cobain Montage of Heck, which is his take on what might have been going on in Kurt Cobain's head and this sort of thing. It's not really a factual documentary by any stretch. So the article is about him and Sheila Nevins, who is the documentary acquisitions person, essentially, for HBO at the time. So here's a quote from Brett Morgan on making a movie about Kurt Cobain. Quote, "I'm as cynical as anyone. I didn't know if there was anything left to say or hear or experience when I took this job on," Morgan says. "What Montage of Heck accomplishes, though, gets at the heart of HBO's recent nonfiction success, a narrative built on emotional truth. Quote, "There is no objective truth. which is why movies that are built on Wikipedia biographies are failed attempts to begin with, Morgan says. The article goes on to say, it's hard to divorce yourself from personal experiences. Even when presenting someone else's life, you're looking at it through a lens of your own design. What makes a documentary compelling, or not, is how a director chooses to relate the emotional truth in an artful way. HBO has been a champion for such directors, acting as a megaphone for projects the network acquires or building out its own films in-house. HBO's eminent voice in contemporary documentaries has in large part to do with Sheila Nevins, president of HBO Documentaries. Her boiled-down strategy, relatability, relevance, creative clarity, and echoing Morgan, emotional truth. Quote, we have to cut through the morass of media, Nevins says. One of the ways to cut through is not just star appeal, but by touching the population where it hurts and where it also energizes them. You have to zero in some way. You have to find a way into it. The article goes on. There are some connections that transcend immediate differences. Can you relate on an emotional level? Or are you simply curious to find out what happens in a fraught situation? And it's hitting that nerve that has the power to reverberate intensely with viewers. So, what we're seeing here is there's no such thing as facts. There's only how you feel about it, the emotional truth that is within all of us, the core in all of us. So if you can hit that universal, unless you're a psychopath, that universal emotional truth in people, then they will connect with that, and therefore you have more viewership. And then the article goes on to talk to Marian Safinia, president of the International Documentary Association, who says, quote, documentaries that transport me into a world that otherwise I wouldn't have any access to are incredibly powerful. The power of docs is they're about people, and at the end of the day, we are one people. At the risk of sounding awfully like a hippie, there's much more that connects us than separates us. And now here's a bit more from Nevins of HBO, and this gets into what Oprah Winfrey said is the reason that she decided to tag along and do a post-interview with these guys after the Leaving Neverland documentary. Nevins says of HBO, and this is incredible to me. Well, okay. Nevins, more than anyone, can attest to how far documentaries and documentary storytelling have come. When Nevins first started at HBO in 1979 after leaving a job at ABC's 2020, she admits she didn't know anything about making documentaries and put into production films that recapped the decades. Quote, they were so boring, Nevins recalls. And then I saw Jaws was doing well. So then I did a story about sharks. And when War of the Roses was doing well, I did a story about divorce and alimony. So I stole from the movies audiences were buying. Ideas that could be documentaries. We look for the things in the changing world that most people would be interested in at a given time. So it's not a consistent thing. It's what's in the atmosphere of importance at a particular time and place. You have to feel the day. You have to feel the todayness of the day. And the article goes on to say, but it's more than reacting to box office numbers. Bringing out humanistic through lines in topicality begins with the interviewing process and continues into clear storytelling. None of this has to do with facts, once again, right? But more than that, see if you can follow this bit of oddness. So she's saying what makes sense, right? You see what audiences are connecting with, like Jaws, and then you go, oh, I'm going to do a documentary about sharks, and then they're going to be interested in this. Okay, that's fine. But nowadays, that's then. Now, that documentary about sharks doesn't even have to have facts in it. It can just make you feel something, the way Jaws did. So you might as well just be making Jaws at that point, right? But that's not the weird thing. The weird thing is, Oprah is claiming that this isn't about Michael Jackson. It's about seizing, as Nevins would say, the todayness of the day. It's like, this is the pressing issue on the minds of people, which are ever-changing issues. So this is the issue, and we're going to cue in on it because that's what this film cues in on. Subject be damned. Therefore, she is saying that this subject, that this documentary, Leaving Neverland, could be a work of fiction or not. That's not important. What's important is that everybody wants to talk about child molestation at the moment. And so let's seize on that and talk about it. Are we living in bizarro land where it doesn't matter even to Oprah Winfrey whether or not the documentary is a documentary? It doesn't matter to HBO whether the documentary is documenting fact? In fact, the very director of Kurt Cobain's super popular movie, and Nevins agrees, thinks that documentaries are failing when they focus on facts. It's all about creating an emotional space that connects with all of us on an emotional level that is universal, therefore wider audience. And that because we're calling that emotional truth, makes it sound as though it's striking a chord, and therefore the subject that we're plastering our eyes on is also true. I mean, there is no saying, I'm going to make a documentary, I'm going to make something that I claim is factual, but may or may not be factual. But because I'm saying it's factual, and that's the reason you're watching it, I'm going to play all the right notes so that it strikes you in a way emotionally. I'm going to manipulate you into feeling something. And if I do it right, then practically everyone watching it will feel that way. And that's what good documentary filmmaking is. Not getting the facts right. Making everyone universally feel a way that if we call that emotional truth, we're to what? Pretend that we're not transposing that onto the actual film itself? And therefore the Michael Jackson quote-unquote case? Of course we're going to. Of course we're going to look at the thing that we're looking at and go, oh, association. It's making me feel this way, therefore this must be true. Therefore he did it. There is no divorce of like, oh, I'm watching this thing that claims to be true, it's striking a chord in me, and that chord is true, but that thing I'm watching that's triggering it, that might not be true. Like, no, people don't work that way. We're not going to do that. And that is not what it is meant to do. So this sense of like blurring the lines of fake news, real news, is now fake documentaries. You see? And not only that, the contempt with which even this filmmaker and Nevins herself treat facts is incredible. Nevins goes on to say, quote, a good documentary should be like a good conversation. It should be something that is not above or below people who are trying to gain information about something. A clear and compelling narrative, a clear and compelling nowness, and nothing muddled where you walk out and say, what'd they say? It should be good and developed and interesting and never boring. That's the worst. Yeah, but that's just the architecture around the core, which should be factual, which should be fact-based. Not someone like Dan Reed saying, well, I did a deep dive into the case, and I couldn't find anything to negate what these two guys are saying, so here's 4 hours of these guys saying it. A deep dive into a case that, again, the FBI looked into, that the DA, the Santa Barbara DA, looked into, that, again, Michael Jackson's fame working against him, everyone wanted to get him. They thought he was guilty, and they couldn't make the case. But here's Dan Reed, who saw through all of that. And the reason that we're all asleep and ignoring the facts of that, the factualness of that, is because we've been trained to not look at that. Not even to not care about it, to not even acknowledge it. So you've got all these people, and you can see it even in the comments on this stuff, where they're saying, you know, Michael Jackson is guilty. I always knew it, or he's guilty. We all knew it. We were just waiting for the evidence. We were just waiting for the thing to come, and here it is. And the reason you can say that is because, I mean, everybody knew that there was a trial, right? Everyone at least knew that Michael Jackson was on trial. So even if you're not a Michael Jackson fan, you knew that. So to say, now we have the evidence, is to say that there was never a trial where evidence was presented and debunked. And now, as Michael Jackson fans, we want to say, like, people are purposely blinding themselves. This is going deeper. We are being pre-programmed through the news and through documentaries to not acknowledge facts. And so the fact that this happened isn't even registering with people. Oh, there already was evidence. It was called the Michael Jackson trial. It was already presented. And maybe this is why Dan Reed can sit with a producer in the UK from Channel 4 or whatever it was, and the producer can be like, Dan, what would make a great documentary? There's still this question about Michael Jackson. There is no question about Michael Jackson. There's a question because there's an emotional attachment that one has to thinking he is still guilty because of our own prejudices against a guy who is eccentric and childlike and likes kids, right? Like, that to us trumps any of the facts of the trial. The fact that he was acquitted on all counts. And essentially, that trial included the evidence of the 1993 case, right? So it's not like a big conspiracy amongst people to necessarily even ignore the facts. It's that facts aren't registering anymore. Even with Oprah, facts aren't registering anymore. It's just, the fact is, people are feeling a certain way and we must exploit that at all costs. Going back to Safina, quote, documentaries have changed a lot over the last 10 years, even in the last 10 years. People have brought a much higher storytelling game to documentary filmmaking, so it's much less on the nose. There's a level of artistry that comes into the form. So I think we're getting great filmmaking and it happens to be truthful. Does it? And should it happen to be truthful? Should we be stumbling into truthful on our way through storytelling and great artistry? Or should truth be at the heart of it? And if it's a documentary, actually, shouldn't facts be at the heart of it? The facts of the case should tell the story that creates the truth that is the universal emotive thing that connects with us. Not the other way around, and then maybe there's some facts involved. Now, getting back to Morgan, I'll just end on this with this article. This is the director of the Kurt Cobain thing. Morgan is in the middle of recounting a recent post-screening Q&A when someone in attendance took his statement that he's not concerned with facts to mean he's creating films based on lies. And he's going to swear here, so earmuffs, children. Quote, it's an acknowledgement that there's no such thing as an objective truth. There's no such thing as an objective fact. But there is something called an emotional truth. That's what I'm after. And I use real people's lives, and I am so hardcore in my research, I did not phone this shit in. I want to fuck every frame that comes before me. I want to know it inside and out. What a pretentious tool this guy is, right? Now, I didn't see the movie. Maybe the movie is great. I don't know. But God. The article does go on to say, there can be an expectation for documentaries to cram every small detail of a subject's life into a film, with no cherry-picking allowed. When documentarians speak of truth, however, what's stressed constantly is the emotional undercurrent of facts. So toward the end here, Morgan then says, what's important with Montage of Heck is the knowledge and understanding that I'm the author of this film. So this is my interpretation of my journey through the vault, Morgan says. I think the reason it could be considered successful has to do with how much I was able to relate to Kurt and allow myself to be open to see certain through lines of action that I would not have been able to experience if A, I went into there with the preconceived notions, or B, didn't have access to all the primary sources, or C, if I hadn't had the life experience to allow me to be sensitive and open to those themes. End quote. For Nevins, producing game-changing documentaries like Montage of Heck is only part of the equation to maintaining HBO's prominence in the field. It's also, quote, how do we get into the heartbeat of that particular ethos of a particular time in a way that's uniquely ours? And people won't say, I saw this documentary on television. They'll say, I saw this documentary on HBO. Ting! So listen, people in radio who might be watching this, or interviewers, or in television, I hope, podcasters, all y'all, Do we have a responsibility to call this out, not just in the news, but with documentaries? Is this okay? I mean, if it is okay, should it be its own brand of documentary? Like, is there a brand of documentary where the film director, who's an arrogant tool like this, who's like, everybody's got to know the documentary is really about me and my journey. I went through the vault. I felt these things. I related to them because of who I am, and that's what this film is. Okay, well then let's call that, I don't know what, the Vainglorious documentary. I don't know what you would call that. Me. What about someone else? I don't know what you would call that, but let's call it something, and then also have documentaries. Faction? I guess that word's already taken. Why are we okay with losing a factual basis for things? And listen, I think this is deep stuff. I think this goes into the fact that logic and reason, as the modus operandi of our westernized civilization, is a wrong step to begin with. And so that wrong step will eventually crumble around you, and there's no better way to have it crumble than for those the most rational and logical among us to build technology that makes us, as logical people, irrelevant, right? So computing systems that are going to be greater than the human brain can compute makes us irrelevant. So how do we find relevance if we're not the computers of facts? Well, what do we have that robots don't and computers don't? Well, we're emotional. We have emotion. We have a universal shared sense of how things feel and should be based on that, and are based on that. So if we can tap into that, then we're still relevant in this world that we're building that is transcending our ability to compute. I mean, I honestly think it goes that deep, and that these are just unconscious expressions of that. But however you want to deal with it, I think it's important to call this out. And I think it's greater than Michael Jackson, obviously. It's greater than Oprah. And so while you can do external things that I talked about in the last video to help get the truth or the facts spread about Michael Jackson, or keep him in the conversation as an innocent, you can do that, but that's a wave, and there's a tidal wave here that is crashing over us, and we're doing it. We're creating it, and so that needs to be dealt with, and that's an inward thing. For most of us, that's an inward thing. But there is an external component to that, which again is radio and TV personalities. If they start having a conversation about this, then maybe we can reverse that tide. I don't know. Because what generally tends to happen is finally someone will come along and do the proper documentary, right? Maybe it's Taj Jackson, I don't know, but someone will come along and do the proper documentary and show that Michael Jackson was innocent again. And then what the media will do is they'll have a come to Jesus moment about that, right? Like, where did we go wrong? Maybe we focused on the wrong things. And then they'll do a bunch of pieces about they'll try harder next time. But the thing is, the mind has already changed. The mind has already changed to this other thing where we're no longer concerned with facts but a mode of truth. And that will not be part of their, let's rethink what we're doing. So the cycle will continue again and again. And we see this in other ways with the news, right? Where they cover shallow stuff, or they cover propaganda from one party or another, and then something happens in the opposite direction, and they go, oh, wait, why did we focus on the wrong thing? Why did we tell you the wrong thing for so long? Wash, rinse, repeat. They keep doing it. Because this is what we do. This is not a grand Illuminati top-down conspiracy. This is inward moving out thing that we're bringing into the world, into our own civilization. And is this what we want to do? Sit with that question for a while. I look forward to your comments. Now, let's tackle one more issue, and that is the racism.